Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Cristina Howorun, and I am the producer and reporter behind VeraCity Fighting Traffic. And I'm here to host one of our Ask Me Anything questions. My guest this afternoon is Caroline Pugh-Roberts. Anybody that saw the film or watched any of the new series will know that she is a sex trafficking survivor, but she's also a very brave, strong, anti-sex trafficking advocate, and she works with sex trafficking victims and helps to turn them, to borrow from Caroline here, into victors. And she's going to be here with us this afternoon answering any questions you may have about the new series or the film. And Caroline, is there anything you want to say just to start us off?
Yeah, hi everybody. Hi, thank you for being here. This is great.
So the first question that we have that came into us is from Kev. I imagine that's Kevin. And he asks, where does the push need to come from to get police forces to make human trafficking a priority? Does it have to come from local government, provincial, federal? Are the community supports adequate for the women who want to exit? So that's a couple of questions there. Caroline, let's just go through what needs to happen to help police forces make this a bigger priority.
Well, we have a degree of push already with Bill C-36, PACEPA, Protected Exploited Persons Act. But local governments are not enforcing it. And I'm going to be straight up. I wonder if it's because it doesn't suit their agenda, because all kinds of people are purchasers. So the laws are there, but they need to be enforced. And that's a real issue. And there are not even close to enough supports for afterwards. You know, it's one thing to get a woman out, or a man, because I am working with male victims, out. But if the supports aren't there and they're sitting alone in their room, depressed and withdrawing from drugs, and no one's out there helping them, they end up going back. So we have to be there for them. And ideally, we don't go downriver and keep pulling people out. We go upriver and find out why they're going in. So that's the ideal. But the laws are there. They need to be enforced, and we need to make these laws be enforced.
So, and I would just want to add to that, it seems to me that police forces, and I've spoken with a lot of different officers at the RCMP and different police forces across the country, and they really do want to make this a priority, but it's always a competition, right? So how many officers can they devote and train to be specifically in a human trafficking unit? And, you know, how many other ones have to combat the crimes that are immediate and happening right there, such as murder or theft, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The argument that I would make is that this needs to be treated just as seriously as the murders and the thefts and the sex assaults and the gun violence, because they really are all interconnected.
Absolutely.
And a victim of sexual violence is very well could end up becoming a victim of sexual trafficking. So these crimes are, I would argue, just as heinous, and in some cases, if not more so, than some of the other big ticket crime items that people want to go after and that get a lot more press, right? Because
absolutely,
you can't show a picture of the 12 girls and women and men that you've saved from sex trafficking, but you can certainly put on a nice display showing the guns and the money and the drugs that were confiscated in a big bust.
Yeah, so that, I think there's optics there. So, and you're right, you're 100% right. People don't recognize that when there is human trafficking, there's also gun running, there's also drug dealing, there's also murder, there's also rape. It encompasses all of those. So they may go to a murder scene, but that murder scene happened because of a trafficking, or a drug bust or a gun bust is actually also what's behind it is human trafficking, because they're trafficking everything, not just people.
And one thing that Caroline, just to address the second part of Kevin's question, I know that you do work with the London Abused Women Center, and you do work with the Salvation Army, and you've got this program. It's a 3-tiered approach to help survivors. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I'd love to. The program is called Cornerstone Dignity Cornerstone. And the premise is, like Cristina said, it's built on 3 pillars. And the first pillar is to build transformational relationships with the women. And that means having relationships with them so that they have somebody who wants nothing from them, only for them. The second pillar is to broaden horizons. And these women, all they have is their trafficker and selling sex. And I see it intergenerationally too. So they have no idea that the world is actually a pretty cool place. So to that end, I take them camping, museums, Triple C Ranch out in Hamilton. They're wonderful. They have animals there. We take them out there for goat yoga. Spanish lessons. We teach them deaf culture. We show them more to the world than just what they're experiencing. And the third pillar is to help them transition back into mainstream society. And by that, I mean skill set required to survive in the trafficking world doesn't translate as well into the boardroom or Timmy's. So for some of the women, because it's been intergenerational, it could be something as simple as teaching them please and thank you. A lot of these women have never held a real job. The average age of education of the women I've been dealing with has been grade 5. So I tutor them to their grade 12s. I've got 2 that I'm tutoring in college now too. I teach them how to drive. We've built collaborations with Goodwill who will give them work experience on the retail floor. So there's something on their resume. Pathways will train them in a career, for example, custodial services or business admin. So they have a resume, they have something to put on it, and they have an actual skill set. Now, some of the skill sets, like for example, sales, you have to sell yourself when you're being trafficked. So that is a skill set that's marketable and you can use in the square life, which is what they call it. But we've seen great success. In 2 years, 19 women have exited permanently, 5 were in school, 3 were working full-time, and now 2 of them are in college. So we know the program works.
And I just want to add to that. One of the things that I discovered in doing the research in this is that a lot of times survivors are victims of identity theft.
Yep.
And certainly credit harm. And that could involve a trafficker opening up several different cell phone accounts and Visa and MasterCard and all of that kind of stuff in their names. And what's really disheartening is actually getting girls and women to apply for OSAP and helping them get into college and then not letting them go there. So the OSAP goes into a bank account that's ultimately controlled by the trafficker.
Yeah.
There's a great and fantastic not-for-profit called Project Recover. And they work exclusively with human trafficking survivors. There's no cost involved. It's run by volunteer and retired bankers and finance guys and girls. And they help to clean up that woman or man's credit record. But the one thing that they can never get as a forgiven fraudulent cost is their student loans. And that actually prevents these women and girls, and it's overwhelmingly women and girls, so I'm going to say that, from going on to post-secondary education because they're in arrears for an OSAP loan or for a federal loan for a class that they could never attend.
Yeah.
And so until they pay that back, they can't get a new loan. So that's something that I think that the province and the federal government really has to work on because they calculate that on average, a trafficking victim actually earns the government about $14,000 in HST for hotel rooms, for Airbnbs, even for flight tickets in some cases. And so their loans are pretty comparable to what they're giving back in terms of HST, and yet the governments aren't forgiving those loans. So it's preventing people in some cases from moving on. And that's something that I also think needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that's a huge one because personally, I had people's jewelers. I had all kinds of accounts opened that I never saw anything out of. So, and you're right. And so to that end, also, a lot of prior to Bill C-36, women were being charged and found guilty of prostitution. It's not, they don't do that anymore. So those criminal charges need to be expunged so that they also move on. Because if you have a criminal record, you can't be a volunteer. How are you supposed to go and get a job? How are you supposed to move forward? Some of these women are hitting huge roadblocks there and you can't get over or around and are having to go back because how else are they going to eat? And even though the trafficker barely feeds them, at least it's some food. And it really is at that level and that bad for many women and men.
And I'm just going to make sure that people know what Bill C-36 is. Do you want to give like a brief synopsis?
It's the Exploited Persons Act. And what it does is it criminalizes the purchase of sex and doesn't let the woman be charged. Now, the premise behind that is so that she can, when she's ready, exit without a criminal record. And human trafficking would not happen if there was no demand for sex purchasing. So if we end the demand, then there's no need for supply, and it's basic economics. And we know it works because we've seen it happen in other countries. It does work. And, there's people who say she made a choice. And if that is your choice, then I have no right to tell you what to do with your body, but I do want quality of life for these women. And working in an environment where body organs can prolapse and collapse, I don't think is quality of life.
So you touched on something, and it is one of the questions that we received from a viewer is, why go after the Johns? And I know that we addressed this quite a bit in the new series and quite a bit throughout the film, but why go after the Johns? The Johns are just paying for a service. That's the argument that's being made.
Mm-hmm. Well, sex is not a human right. It's not even a need, it's a want. A human right is food, air, water, safety, freedom, and I think education. So when I hear, I need it. No, you don't. You actually want it. You don't need it. And with all due respect, if it's that bad, use the other hand because you feel you need variety. It's inherently exploitive. And I have never, in 20 years of doing this work, found a woman personally who's ever gotten out with anything to show for it. So it's not an industry it's not a viable career option. And these men are not helping these women have quality of life by purchasing sex because he's actually entrapping her. I've met men who knew the woman that they were with was being trafficked and they didn't care. So yeah, we have to go after the Johns because many men don't care. And if they're doing this, then their trafficking will happen. They are enabling and creating trafficking. It's very, very basic.
If we go, and the argument that I've heard from you and from others within the film is that, if you go after Johns, it decreases demand because they don't want to be facing a criminal charge. They don't want their family members or their workplace or friends to see their names in the paper with a charge. So there'll be a decrease in demand for these services. But more so than that, every single survivor I spoke with said that if the John had asked them, hey, do you want to be doing this? You'd lie. You'd say, yeah, of course I do. And why is that, Caroline?
Because there's several reasons. First of all, you don't know if that customer was actually sent by the trafficker to test you. Second of all, you have a quota, and if you don't make that quota, you're going to get hurt. And I think I don't remember, but they like to burn us. They burn with cigarettes. There's a pimp stick, which means they take a coat hanger, bend it in half, heat it up, and burn her with that. She's going to get hurt if she doesn't bring the money in. She has to lie. And there's also another thing that's not often talked about is that we have to justify to ourselves what we're doing. We have to make it okay for ourselves too. And so, yeah, I chose this, but I would argue, when you have no other choice but to sell your body, it was never a choice. So heck yes, we lie. And you want that customer, and when I say if he's a good customer, by that I mean someone who's regularly there and doesn't hurt you. That's what makes a good customer. It's not like when you're in a restaurant, a good customer is pleasant to be around. It's not the same. You want those good customers because you know you're not going to get hurt. So yeah, you tell them whatever you think they need to hear. And the guys out there just said to me, oh, she really liked me. Of course she made you think that, because that's what's going to make you spend the money. Hello?
It's a question that we have here from Jenny is, how can she help? And I think what she's meaning here is really, how does the average person help?
That's a super cool question, and I love it. I do a lot of public speaking, and I always say at the end of it, if you even only just tell one more person that this is happening, then you've done something. But if you want to do something more concrete, when you see, okay, so this is for the general audience. First thing off, check your bias, because no woman is born thinking that that's where she's going to land up. Something got her to that place. Check your bias. They are human beings with wishes, wants, hopes, and dreams, and they matter. You can hand out Tim Hortons cards, snacks to the women on the street. If you see them, talk to them. They're real people. But I do apply the 3-minute rule. Spend 3 minutes with them and walk on, because if she's being watched, you could just be asking for the time. You could be asking for directions. You don't put her or yourself in danger, because each girl is worth about $350,000 a year to the trafficker. If you get between him and $350,000, it could be dangerous. So apply the 3-minute rule. And the goal is to build rapport. she sees you and knows you're consistent and that you're safe, and hopefully one day she'll reach out to you. So in the event of that, start to know what the resources are. Where are you going to send her? Because I hope eventually they all do reach out. Know what you're talking about. Speak to your politicians. The Trudeau government right now is trying to legalize prostitution. In Amsterdam and Germany right now, 88% of all the women who are working are being trafficked. You cannot legislate it and control it, because what happens is organized crime comes in and takes over. So speak to your politicians. We have to keep Bill C-36 as it is. Otherwise, Canada is going to turn into a sex tourist destination and all the accompanying stuff that goes with it. And it's not pleasant. If we legalize prostitution in Canada, we are literally opening the doors of our communities and saying, welcome to organized crime. So advocate that this does not happen in Canada. We're a country that's supposed to be nice. We can't have this depravity, this level of depravity happening here. So speak to your politicians, go out and educate people. And if you see the woman, build rapport, build rapport.
We have a question here from a viewer, and I think they're just really interested in the work that you do day to day, because we really got a small sense in the film of how busy your life is and how much you're just on the go, on the go, on the go. So the question is, Caroline, what does day-to-day life look like for you? How often are you on the streets looking for women who are being trafficked or helping women who are being trafficked?
Well, I often work 14, 22 days straight. I get calls at 3, 4 in the morning, often from the police, from girls that are in trouble. I try to do outreach every single day. But what that looks like is me getting in my car and driving to the areas that I know where girls are working and where people are hanging. And I will, depending on, so I can drive up to a scene and let's say there's 20 people sitting and they're doing drugs. But I know that, myself included, these women are doing drugs because it's self-medication, because there's so much pain. So depending on the vibe I get, like I'm starting to get really well known in the streets, I will get out of my car or I will roll down my window and call it, hey girlie, how's it going? And I'll straight out ask some people, what's it gonna do to get you off the street? What do you need? Or I'll just leave my cards with people. My phone doesn't stop ringing. It's you can't hear it now because I got them both on silence, but it's tons of emails trying to, I want the Attorney General to expunge these prostitution charges, because there's a girl on the street and I talked to her, goes, well, I got charges. I can't, yes, you can, because it's been expunged. You can move forward. I'm constantly looking for donations. So that these women can have things like Christmas is coming. I've got at least 40 women that I'm trying to find gifts for, and children. I'm constantly trying to find a roof over the head for these women. I take them back and forth to hospitals. I support them in court. I support them with the police. I'm currently writing a book right now, and it's for afterwards, because what we see a lot is that it's the boyfriend, lover boy / Romeo pimp trafficker scenario. He gets her to fall in love with him. She recognizes eventually and leaves that he wasn't okay. So the book covers things like, why do I still love him? It covers things like, I go for a job interview, and when I go in, the man behind the desk was a customer. How do I handle it? Am I crazy? Because you have all these, we're talking about dissociative, identity disorder, disassociation, anxiety, depression, all kinds of PTSD, all kinds of after effects. I've personally, again, in 20 years, never met a person who has escaped without mental health, serious mental health issues and addictions. So my day is really always very, 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 very busy. And I'll travel. I travel a fair distances when I get referrals to go meet people. I had a woman not so long ago who had a hole chipped in her skull and a microchip put in. So it's all kinds of stuff that happens, and no day is ever the same, but I wake up and I start to run every single day.
I can attest to that. Spending several weeks with you, every single day, it was on the go. I mean, when you watch the film, you see her or Caroline and I driving around, but what you don't see is how often that phone rang, how many times we were pulled over, how many times you were talking to different people at the London Abused Women's Center or different shelter places or different people from victim services to help get women homes. We went grocery shopping to find food for a woman who you had found a safe house for, which was just a hotel that was across the street from a hotel where trafficking is happening, because that's the only place you could find. But we were still going grocery shopping to bring her some food to put in that little bar fridge because she had just escaped. I mean, you are just on the go all the time. And one thing that you and I spoke about quite a bit was the lack of beds. So London does not have a safe house for beds for victims of sex trafficking. We know that here in Toronto, the Covenant House does a lot of work with young sex trafficking survivors. But all across the country, there are very few places that are 100% dedicated and that have enough beds to fill the need for sex trafficking victims. Why do sex trafficking survivors need their own beds? Why can't they just go to a shelter for women or a general shelter?
I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. So you can take a woman and put her in a domestic violence shelter who has been trafficked. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the women who are in there, their abusers had issues around pornography and prostitution. So when she goes in there, she's seen as the enemy. And I get that. I truly do. A lot of staff in the shelters are not trained on human trafficking. And so the difference between a domestic violence shelter and a safe house, one of the huge differences is what traffickers do is they send in other women to go in and pull the girls back out. So in a safe house, for example, protocol is often that a new arrival will not interact with the other woman for 30 days unless there's a staff member around, so that she cannot recruit back out. The staff are uniquely trained on human trafficking, and these domestic violence shelters roughly 24 days. How do you get your entire life back in 24 days when you don't even have identification? And all you want to do is sleep, because for the first time in, say, 8 years, you've been able to exhale. It's not humanly possible, even for the domestic violence women, to get their life back in 24 days. It cannot be done. So the safe houses are usually 6 months to a year. So it gives a person time to exhale, gather their wits, and now think, what is my next step? All programming is run on site. If they're younger, they get their schooling, they get computer training, they get dedicated counseling, psychotherapy help. There's addiction help on site. I call it one-stop shopping, for lack of a better way to put it. And the women that they're with get it, get where they've been and get where they're trying to go. So there's profound differences and profound reasons for dedicated human trafficking beds.
I have a question here from Stephanie, and it's asking, sometimes when they hear about police charges, a woman is actually involved. So how are women traffickers?
Another super great question. So the traffickers have what's called a stable, and it can be between 5 women, 6 women, 8 women. In order to not get hurt as much or made to work as much, the trafficker will say to her, one of the women, if you go out and recruit for me, I won't make you work as much and I won't beat you as much. So often, not always, but often when we see a woman being charged, she's actually a victim also. And this was something I had to learn, that perpetrators are often victims too within that hierarchy. Unfortunately for her, it is illegal to do that. But she's trying to save her own skin, which I don't know who wouldn't do that if they were in that scenario.
It's tough, because a lot of the victims, or a lot of women that we see behind bars, not all, but a lot of women that we see behind bars are victims themselves, yes, either of abuse that has led them into drugs, or in this case, they've been trafficked, so they're trying to find a way out. One thing that Megan Walker talked to me about was one of the tactics that they use is sending these, and excuse my language here, but the bottom bitch, which is what they are often called, into shelters for domestic violence victims, into shelters for homeless individuals, because those people tend to be vulnerable, and recruiting them that way. While we were in London, there's a motel located next to a Tim Hortons. And I started speaking with the Tim Hortons manager there, and she told me one of the women there at the motel was being trafficked, and she would see her come in sometimes and try to recruit other young women, and they would often push her away. But she would see her doing this, and she asked me this question, and it's because she's trying to save her own skin.
Yeah,
exactly what you said. Because if they're working, then she's not.
Yeah.
And
it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. These traffickers, I went to a seminar in Toronto on the psychopathology of traffickers, and many of them have no conscience. And it's amazing though, they have an astute and innate ability to sense vulnerability. And it works. I watched a documentary on a trafficker speaking from jail, and the interviewer asked him, "How do you do it?" And the guy who had been looking down, and he stood up and he looked at the interviewer and he said, "I sell them the dream." Now, people will often say, "Why does she stay with him after what he's doing to her?" And I'll be quite blunt. What he's doing to her is not as bad as what Daddy was doing to her. So that's another vulnerability. And at least the trafficker, in her mind, loves her. So we have to stop asking across the board, why does she stay? And start asking, why does he do that? And why doesn't he stop? The onus is always put back on the victim. She's done nothing wrong. It's the other person who is 100% in the wrong, and we need to be holding them accountable, not the victims.
Well, and it's important, I think, to point out that not all victims of sex trafficking are victims of childhood sexual abuse.
Nope.
We know that many come from middle class backgrounds. We know that overwhelmingly they are Canadian, overwhelmingly they're female, but a lot of times it's a girl or a woman that's lured from a social media site.
Yep.
That's tricked into it with the Romeo pimp. We know that they could be lured straight from their positions if they work in a fast food court, or if they work at a bar, if they work at a restaurant, they work anywhere. We've seen it happen to individuals that, have jobs that are very white collar and that are in the business world. So it doesn't just happen to people that have experienced childhood trauma, although they are certainly much more vulnerable. Yeah. It happens to people from all walks of life.
That's where I sell them the dream comes in. I've got girls who go to school every day and then are being trafficked after school, and then I go home to mom and dad, and mom and dad don't know. As you say, it's a middle class house and things look good. But we know that since COVID, trafficking has expanded 5-fold through Facebook. A lot of these girls and guys, the thing is to have as many friends as possible, so they accept everybody. And then this person gets a hold of them and tells them how beautiful they are and how your parents don't understand you, but I do. And I'll make your life great. And starts buying them the nails, the tracksuits, the name brand stuff, the handbags. And when you're 16, 14, 13, this is heady stuff. He loves me and he's older and he's got money. This is great. But he has nefarious purposes. And once she's in, he will videotape the two of them having sex and then say, if you don't do what I want, it's going on the internet and your family's going to see it. Or by now he knows where her family is, where the baby brother goes to school. If you don't do it, I know where your brother goes to school and I'll get him. And it's possible that he will. And she's young and believes him, and then is now doing it just to save her family.
It's a very, very scary situation. I think we have time for just one more question. This is coming in from somebody who goes by the name of T. Why are the GTA, I guess, police forces allowing escort agencies to run and doing so for years without doing anything?
Well, it's not illegal. It's not legal, but it's not illegal to sell sex. It is illegal to purchase it. So once again, we shouldn't be putting this on the escort agencies. We need to be stopping the men from purchasing, because they are the ones who are breaking the law. Having said that, it is illegal to advertise for someone else. So the escort agencies then are breaking the law. Okay, so they can go after them from that point, but I cannot explain to you why they're not doing it. This is what I was talking about earlier. The laws need to be enforced. And we need to hold our politicians accountable here, which means making the phone calls, sending the emails, if necessary, holding the protests, because the laws are there. Enforce them. They have to enforce the laws.
Any last words, Caroline?
Yes, now that you know, any form of silence is complicity. You have to pick a side here. Silence is picking a side, and that's of the traffickers. Silence is complicity. And like I said, at the very least, if the only thing you do is talk about this, then you've done something. Thank you.
Caroline, I can't thank you enough. I think that you have every contributor that was part of the making of Fighting Traffic, but you've all done such a great job. And Caroline, I think that you will change lives. I think you've certainly opened up my eyes there was so much of this happening. I could not believe it. And I think that you said it to me, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
I'll never be able to look at a hotel or a motel the same way. I know what I'll be looking for when I'm going to locations. And since our time together, I see it so much more, and I see how prevalent it is on the streets of Toronto and even in the suburbs. And it's very frightening. It is very frightening. And I think that you opened up a lot of people's eyes, and I think that you did a fantastic job of sharing your own story, which is just incredible.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you guys are amazing for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, anybody that hasn't seen it, you can head to the City News page. It's on its own page, like VeraCity City News. I'm sorry that I don't know the link offhand. I'm sure that Meredith, who's been coordinating all of this from behind the scenes, I'm sure she can add that to the link to this at the end. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.